Malcolm, just
Are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Number one, of the black man in America is beyond America's ability to solve. It's a human problem, not an American problem or a Negro problem. And as a human problem or a world problem, we feel that it should be taken out of the jurisdiction of the United States government and the United States courts.
We want freedom by any means necessary. We want justice by any means necessary. We want equality by any means necessary. We don't feel that in 1964, living in a country that is supposedly based upon freedom and supposedly the leader of the free world, we don't think that we should have to sit around and wait for some segregationist congressman and senators and a president from Texas in Washington, D.C. to make up their mind that our people are due now some degree of civil rights. No, we want it now, or we don't think anybody should have it.
Uhuru, welcome to We Charge Colonialism, Black August edition. I am Ikemba Ojore, a community organizer and host of We Charge Colonialism Media. Black August is honored every year to commemorate the fallen freedom fighters of the Black Liberation Movement, to call for the release of political prisoners in the United States, to condemn the oppressive conditions of U.S. prisons, and to emphasize the continued importance of the Black liberation struggle. Observers of Black August commit to higher levels of discipline throughout the month. This can include fasting from food and drink, frequent physical exercise and political study, and engagement in political struggle. In short, the principles of Black August are study, fast, train, and fight. During the COVID shutdown, myself with other organizers launched the first Black August Power Hour study by examining George Jackson's Blood in My Eye. We are reviving the Black August Power Hour study with Brother Malcolm X, and we have reached out to organizers within the Black Liberation Movement to participate. We will be meeting every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time to analyze and discuss the philosophy of Malcolm X. Do join us on YouTube or Facebook for this special commemoration of Black August and Black resistance. Our goal is for organizers within the Black Liberation Movement to unpack Brother Malcolm X's views on colonial capitalism in a contemporary context, to unpack resistance in the movement against colonialism from the lens of Minister Malcolm X. We will be reading select texts and discussing related questions to uplift the historical events that has taken place throughout the month of August. Now, welcome to the Black August Power Hour. Hey, welcome. Appreciate everybody for tuning in as usual. Make sure you like and share the podcast, and subscribe if this is the first time joining us for the Black Power Hour. This is Black August, and we have two more of these sessions remaining. Next week, we'll be wrapping up the Black August Power Hour, and just want to appreciate everybody who has been joining us for the entire month of Black August. And I hope everybody's having a revolutionary Black August. Today, we're going to continue to examine Malcolm X, his speech. We're actually going to show a video today. We're not going to read today. We're going to show a video, and then we'll be filled with some questions at the end of the video. So we charge colonialism, and we believe that African people's relationship to Europeans is a colonial relationship, and we believe African people should be in complete control over the resources that are under their feet and have the right to self-determination. And Malcolm X was very outspoken about this. And so we're going to get into Malcolm X. I'm going to share my screen as usual. We have a group of community organizers within the Black Liberation Movement that, again, will be joining us. And I'm going to pass the microphone over to Tone, who's going to introduce our video. And they should be able to hear you now.
Okay. Peace, everyone. I hope everyone's Black August is going well. And you are fasting, praying, and reading, training, and here with us for this study. Today's video is going to actually be super short. Last week we spoke about the talking about message to the grassroots. We won't actually be addressing that. We'll be talking about this short clip where Malcolm addresses Black America as well as women in the movement. And so it's a short clip, so we hope that people listen attentively. And we have loads of questions to unpack and follow along with us. So I'm going to start the video soon.
Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over in that struggle. And the difference now in the direction that the struggle from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context or out of the domestic context or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations. And then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem.
Peace, Tone. You can pause it for a second.
And as a world problem, then
Yeah, I just want to get confirmation that the volume is good. The volume is good. All right, you can continue. Thank you.
It becomes a world problem. And as a world problem, then the Afro-American or the so-called Negroes have more of a chance of getting some real meaningful results because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore. But it's put at a level where the whole world can see that our plight is wrong. And they can bring the moral support of the entire world on our side against this force that has stood in our path in the past. It also makes a difference in the leadership. Those who have been posing as leaders of our people in America in the past, they can pose on this local stage where Uncle Sam is the master of the show and can prop them up and make them look good or make them look better than they actually are by giving them token gains and building them up an image. But when they step onto the international stage or the world stage, then Uncle Sam can't prop them up anymore. And their ability or lack of ability becomes exposed. And if they can lead us forward, they remain leaders. But if they can't, then they have to step aside and more qualified and bona fide leaders step up from the masses of our people, and then we get faster progress, we get more results. Well, in the past, the Afro-American or American Negro intellectual perhaps permitted himself to be used in a way that wasn't really beneficial to the overall Afro-American struggle. But I think today these intellectuals have begun to undertake a new appraisal of the problem, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle. And the African intellectual is beginning to look at the problem in the African context and see that what might be good in one country in order for it to be used in another country has to be rearranged. You take African socialism. Many of the African intellectuals that have analyzed the approach of socialism are beginning to see where the African has to use a form of socialism that fits into the African context, whereas the form that is used in a European country might be good for that particular European country, it doesn't fit as well into the African context. So I think the African intellectual is making that contribution, and he's making it well. One thing that I became aware of in my traveling recently through Africa and the Middle East, in every country that you go to, usually the degree of progress can never be separated from the woman. If you're in a country that's progressive, the woman is progressive. If you're in a country that reflects the consciousness toward the importance of education, it's because the woman is aware of the importance of education. But in every backward country, you'll find the women are backward. And in every country where education is not stressed, it's because the women don't have education. So one of the things I became thoroughly convinced of in my recent travels is the importance of giving freedom to the woman, giving her education, and giving her the incentive to get out there and put that same spirit and understanding in the children. And I frankly am proud of the contribution that our women have made in the struggle for freedom. And I'm one person who's for giving them all of the leeway possible, because they've made a greater contribution than many of us men. And one of the best ways that they can help is to encourage the man, try and inspire him to be more militant, and turn him away from being nonviolent and passive and meek and Uncle Tomish. Make him aware that the black woman wants to see her man be a man, instead of around here using religion as an excuse to be a coward, and some of the things that he's been reflecting here lately. Most people, when we say Afro-American, they think only of the Negroes in the United States, but they don't realize that 2/3 of Brazil consist of people of African blood, which means they're also Afro-American, because Brazil is in South America. And in all of these, many of these countries in South America and Central America, and even in Canada, they are heavily populated with people whose ancestors came from Africa. So when you total up the number of Afro-Americans, real Afro-Americans, in the Western Hemisphere, there are perhaps 100 million. And if these people ever unite among themselves, not only is it necessary for the Afro-Americans in the United States to be organized, but it's also necessary for the Afro-Americans in the Caribbean, or the Afro-Cubans, the Afro-Brazilians. It's necessary for all of them to be organized. And then once they are organized in each place, we have to organize among ourselves, so that the Afro-American in the United States will be working in conjunction in a coordinated program with those who are in Cuba, and those in Brazil, and those in Venezuela, and those throughout the Caribbean, and Haiti, and in the West Indian Islands. And in this way, we actually get strength. And it's not an accident that there's no organization existing in the Western Hemisphere that's designed toward that end. It would be a direct threat to imperialism as it really exists, and to colonialism as it exists in the West. And one of the things that's going to help to bring this about is the independence of Africa. One of the only reasons that we in the West have never organized, we have hated our image and our African image. And because Africa has been in the hands of people who have created an image of Africa that's negative and hateful. And it has been hateful to us. We haven't wanted to identify with it. But now that Africa is getting independent and in a position to create its own image, and it's a positive image, those of us in the West look at the African image and see how positive it is. We begin to identify with it. We become proud of Africa, and we become proud of our African blood, our African heritage. And this is what is beginning to make the Africans in the Western Hemisphere today develop more race pride. And as this race pride develops, then it has a tendency to make us want to unite together and work together. And your Western imperialists and colonialists consider this to be a grave threat, more threat than communism or Marxism or socialism or anything else. The Africanism is what they consider to be the real threat. The Organization of Afro-American Unity sees the only hope for the black man in America in a strong Africa, and the necessity of the Afro-American becoming inseparably linked with the overall program that's existing on the African continent. The two problems must be solved together, and the two forces must go forward together. And so the Organization of Afro-American Unity has a program to link the Afro-Americans with the Africans, and the Africans with the Afro-Americans. When I say Afro-Americans, I mean those throughout the entire Western Hemisphere. This is our only hope. Our hope is in a strong Africa. And when Africa is strong, our position in America will be one of respect. But if Africa is weak, we will never be in a position of respect in America. They used to have a saying that one doesn't have a Chinaman's chance. They don't say that anymore. They use that expression back when China was weak. But now since Mao Zedong has been successful in making China a strong country, the Chinese have more chance than anybody else. So this saying has become outdated. Well, just as it took a strong China to give a Chinese person respect wherever that Chinese person is found on this earth, when we get a strong Africa, the person of African origin or African ancestry will be respected any place on this earth, even in America. But he will not be respected in America until Africa is strong, just as the Chinaman wasn't respected abroad until China became strong.
How did he view the success of China in developing nuclear weapons for her defense?
Well, I think it's one of the greatest things that has ever happened, because up until now, the nuclear devices have been in the hands of Europeans. They've exercised a monopoly over the nuclear weapons, or over the ability to produce nuclear weapons. But now the Chinese have evened it. They've equalized it by being successful, by being a non-white or non-European nation, and at the same time developing successfully the ability to produce nuclear weapons. So as far as I'm concerned, it was a very good thing, and I do hope that they are able to build bigger ones and better ones every day, because the only language that the European powers understand is the language of power. And a dark nation has to be in a position to talk or speak the language that these imperialists understand. And China has developed the ability to be in that position, and as long as she can speak the language that they understand, it's better for the other dark countries.
Yes, men like this live always in the shadow of danger. He was born in white America, but his vision reaches far beyond those limits. It goes deep into the future of the black man.
Today, for the first time, the black people of the West are beginning to look homeward. They're beginning to look back toward the mother continent of Africa, and they're gaining spiritual strength from these roots. The African continent is on the rise, the motherland is on the rise, and our people all over the Western Hemisphere are looking back at this rising continent and the unity of that continent, and it's giving us strength and hope for the future. And for the first time, not only is the black man on the African continent fighting and seeking and fighting for his place in the sun, but his fight is putting the same spirit in the black people in the West, and we are also seeking and fighting for our place in the sun, and we will not rest until that place has been secured.
That was the mic drop.
Was the mic drop?
All right. Hey, peace, everyone. So appreciate everybody for joining. Just joining. If you joined with us late, make sure that you like and share the podcast and subscribe to the channel if this is your first time here. Just got finished listening to Malcolm X discuss African unity, the role of black women in the advancement of the black nation. And so we have some questions that we're going to address, and I'm going to pass it to Tone as she moderates and facilitates this discussion.
Absolutely. So I hope folks were able to hear Malcolm's words, hear what he was describing about Pan-African unity, about the continent, and also about women and how they show up in the movement. And as mentioned, the video is short, but we do have loads of questions to unpack here. So welcome again, everyone, as we kind of delve into this in honoring Black August. Our first question is, what does internationalizing the struggle as one for human rights look like today? So when we hear Malcolm X talking about human rights and pursuit of human rights, what does internationalizing the struggle as a human rights struggle look like today? And as always, feel free to raise your hand or put yourself on stack.
Yeah, is there anyone on stack?
There is. Brother
okay.
Khalid.
Yeah, peace be upon you all. Thank you again. I think this is a great forum and a great series. I think what it looks like today for us as Black people here within the United States of America, it looks terrible, but it's hopeful. And it's hopeful actually because of the work of brothers and sisters connected with projects like those of Brother Jalil Mutakim and Jihad Abdul Mumid and others around bringing certain charges against the United States in front of the UN, in front of the World Court. And I don't know all the details. I'm only marginally involved as a supporter. I think it's something that certainly the brothers can speak to and the sisters can speak to. But I think for the most part, we're in a bad space because we still have not taken our movement outside of the paradigm that Malcolm had explained, which is the civil rights paradigm. And I've said this on several different occasions. We still struggle within a civil rights paradigm, even though we may call it something else. And until we really develop and consolidate a real BLM, not Black Lives Matter, but a Black Liberation Movement, we're going to continue to walk in circles. I think that once we are able to break outside of that and we can start to develop some serious unity, we can develop unity of principle. And then at some point, internally and internationally, we can start to develop even more solid operational unity. And the difference is, oftentimes it's easy to talk about unity of principle, but it's a much deeper struggle to develop some operational unity, i.e. how to get things done and how we do things in unison and in a way that's going to be mutually supportive and not necessarily mutually exclusive of our different parts of the world, our nation states, and the people that we represent. So that's what I would put forward. That right now, it's a mess over here within the United States of America. We have a lot of pretenders. We have a lot of fake people who are positioning themselves and who are presenting themselves as radicals and revolutionaries and leaders of the masses, of Black folks or Afro-descendant people. And they're basically just people on the payrolls of the nonprofit industrial complex and also hanging on the shoestrings of the Democratic Party.
Thank you for that, Brother Khalid. We have Jordan and then Brother Jalil on staff.
Peace and thank you. I wanted to say thank you to Brother Khalil. His statements are always powerful, and I love hearing from you, brother. So I just wanted to thank you for that again. Also, definitely, as far as like what do we see internationally within the empire, again, the spirit of Mandela's push is really one of the main things that we see. I know that there are some folks that are, looking to build internationally, and so I know that is taking place. I know like BAP is doing work. I know Community Movement Builders is doing work internationally as well. But I think a lot of that falls again to, like, I know we were speaking about identity, and Malcolm was linking, like, he was saying that there can't even be a strong Black America until there's a strong Africa, right? He was speaking like about Pan-Africanism and the unity that we must have. And I think that, again, to Brother Khalil's point, we're so far behind because we are so assimilated into empire that most of us don't have any correlation with Africa, right? And I think even right now, that state of quote unquote Black America is so distant from the idea of Africa, even though we can see, again, at the time kind of is now globally, as we see with the work happening on the continent, right, Africans are uniting, and I think it's time for us to unite amongst ourselves here and unite amongst, each other throughout the diaspora. So I think it's interesting. I think this is great timing, obviously, for us to look at this piece, but I think it's very apropos right now. And again, we're in a very unique time slot where unification amongst Africans is happening globally, and if we don't take advantage of that here, again, we will be in we will be in an even worse state. And I yield.
Thank you for that, Brother Jordan. We have Jalil, and then Alita, and then Psycho on staff.
All right. Assalamu alaikum, peace, Pastor Barakani, John Bull. I want to share a few things in regards to what Haj Malik Shabazz shared with us, and also our comments and results of viewing this video. I think one thing is important for us to understand is that our struggle, what we engage in, has to be more unified and more uniformed than anything that we have ever witnessed in the course of history. And the reason why I say that is because we are, in fact, in the belly of the beast. I was on a program yesterday, Pan-Africanists and et cetera, and they were talking about the dynamics that was going on in Mali and in various other parts of Africa. And I informed them that in as much as we have the Pan-Africanist projection in regards to how we internationalize our struggle, right? We also have to affirm within ourselves with our struggle and let the world know that we are in the belly of the beast, that we're going to confront the brunt of fascist repression like no one has ever felt before, right? Because we are in the belly of the beast and we are destroying an empire, right? I explained to them that empires are not destroyed from external forces, but they're destroyed from the internal forces. When the people inside the domestic dynamics of the empire decide they no longer want to live under that system of governing, right? And therefore they seek to find alternative means, and essentially what we call a revolution, the revolt against the system of oppression. And so that's going to be our goal. That has to be our objective. That has to be our understanding of our place in the world, right? That when we are free, the world will be free. Africa will be free because we have in the capacity from which that octopus with its tentacles ciphering resources, labor and resources from other nations. When they cut off those tentacles, they will not have to worry about them going back again because the head of the octopus will have been destroyed by us. And so it's important that we have this clear understanding what our position is with the international community and the rest of the world, right? The Pan-Africans hold a position that we will not be free until Africa is free, right? Nice ideal, right? But the reality of the situation is until the imperialist empire is destroyed, Africa and nobody else on the planet will be free. That's the fact. That's the reality that we have to confront. We have to internalize within ourselves what is our responsibility. Now, let me add this point. Within our struggle, there are divisions. And we have to resolve those divisions. There are the Pan-Africanists, there's the BLM, and then there are, and these are three dynamics. The Pan-Africanists, the BLM, and the New African Independence Movement, right? I make no bones in saying I side with the New African Independence Movement, right? I'm asking those who are involved with the BLM or different Black Liberation Movement people, right? Please tell me what is your ultimate goal and objective to be achieved. Haj Malik Shabazz says that revolutions are made for the securing of land. And we know that in terms of the context of our struggle in the United States, right, that we have been considered property. Now, the goal is that do they want to secure us as continue to be property, right? Or do we as property want to engage in the freedom, liberation, independence to build a homeland, to build a nation, right? If we're not building towards our own nation, then what are we building towards, right? And that's the question I'm asking the BLM folks, right? Those who adhere to the idea of BLM. Do they want to have a socialist America and be integrated into a socialist America? Do they want to, as the Pan-Africans appears, and I'm not certain, because it has not been clearly understood, return to Africa? Is that the Pan-Africanist goal and objective, return to Africa, right? We know what the New African Independence Movement is about. We have clear-cut ideals and goals and objectives that we want to achieve. There's no ambiguity in regards to that, right? And so for us, it is important that we try to organize and get unity and uniformity of as many new Africans as we possibly can, right? This is why I'm calling for the building of Frontline Front for Liberation of the African Nation, right? And it was well spelled out in the book, all right? And which is important. Because when we establish the foundation of what our struggle is about, then we know how do we address the international community, all right? How we move forward with the international community, because we tell the international community what we're about, what we intend to achieve. We're not there yet, but we have not decided that yet. So what we have been doing, particularly under the spirit of Mandela, we've been sending out our ambassadors or individuals to different countries and telling them where we are today, that we're building this campaign to end genocide against Black people, and in certain aspects, we're also raising the question of our independence, national liberation and independence, with our independence movement. Right, so we're building the People's Senate. We're going forward in terms of building a unity as we possibly can, and projecting the ideas and goals of building these decolonization programs across the country. And so the answer of this question of Pan-Africanism, right, or answer this question of where our position is in fighting in the diaspora in Africa, we have to make a decision of what we want to achieve within the continental 3,000 by 4,000, 3,000 by 2,000 miles territory that we know by the indigenous as Turtle Island. All right? So what is our goals and objectives? What do we want to achieve? And then once we understand that, clearly understand that, that's when we project to the international community, and then we make a determination as to what degree we can support them and what we would expect of them in supporting us. All right? So that is my understanding of the situation, and I pray that going forward, we began to really delineate and understand the contradictions amongst our forces, right? Progressive, militant, revolutionary forces. Those who are adhering to the Pan-Africanist posture, those who are adhering to the BLM posture, and those who identify themselves as New African, fighting for independence and liberation of New Africa, right? We have to make those distinctions. We have to understand those contradictions and begin to move towards finding some mediums of unity and cooperation and understanding of what's being projected, not only here, but also what's being projected into the world. I yield.
Okay, wow. Brother Jalil raised a number of points. I just want to make sure that we are like orderly in how we're thinking about this and addressing them. In addition to him questioning, how people are showing up in terms of leaders and those who are purporting to be leaders, but we know they have self-interest. He also raised the three identities in Pan-Africanists, people who are operating within the Black liberation movements, and then New Africans, of which he said he was part of. I want to address that question as part of the third question, but I want to talk about the first part of what you described in our second question. So to circle back to that in question number 2 and 3. Question number 2 is, how do we unite to hold leaders, so-called leaders, those who are instilled by the power structure? Malcolm X talked about Uncle Sam, and those who are voted into office accountable for human rights violations against Black people. Before we address the third question, which is the one of identity that you raised. So for those who are on stack, which were Alita and Psycho, if you can answer the question within that context of like, how do we hold these leaders accountable? The leaders, again, that are instilled by the power structure. So Dr. Hare talks about leaders of Blacks versus Black leaders, and those who are voted in, who say that they're going to support us. How do we hold them accountable for the human rights violations against Black people?
Okay. Say that new part of, I guess you said this is number 2. Can you say that again, just so make sure I can?
Sure. So you mean the question or the
the question that, yes, the question.
Sure. How do we unite to hold so-called leaders, those who might be instilled by the power structure, Uncle Sam, or voted into office, accountable for the human rights violations against Black people?
Okay. Yeah, I believe, and I wanted to mention on, first of all, acknowledging that everyone so far I have definitely heard and definitely feel similar on the need, but I think how to get to that place is where I'm talking about, and it's about the process. So I think we mentioned that there are, I think it was 4 tendencies. And so I see, and I could be wrong and open to debate, that the 5 tendencies are the Black liberation theology, Pan-Africanism, nationalism, feminism, and socialism. Now, those are ideological debates to be talked about. And that's why I want to answer your question this way. To hold them accountable, those people that are not us, from what I hear you saying, because you're talking about politics. I think first, we need to find a way where we are just going to come to debate. If it's the Pan-African, if it's the liberation movement, I think there is a place in history. If we can just go to 67, 68 is when I was born, we had the Black Power Conference. We had the 1970 Congress of African People. In 1970, we had the Revolutionary People's Convention for the Black Panther Party. In 72, then was the Gary National Black Assembly. And 74 was the African Liberation Support Committee. And then 81 was the National Black Independent Political Party, and the 1998 Chicago Black Radical Congress. I was the speaker as a young person. I'm now 55. So in all of these structures of us coming together, we had big numbers. We didn't have the debates first, like we can do because we have Zoom and other, funding to travel. I think it was, to me, the fact that we all said, let's come. And there was a place of debate that was principled then that we've lost. So one proposal that I see to talk about this issue, as you said, to hold them accountable, is a collective conscious debate. Mamiya said we need a collective conscious. And to me, a process that would make people come, like they're having this million-man, the march to redo the March on Washington this weekend. If we as radical, as revolutionaries did the same, and only together did that. I do acknowledge the conference that happened in Atlanta, but the democratic process would say, these are the terms of what we're going to do when we come, and not be fearful of the debate, of the different ideologies amongst the safe, that whatever we say, we're not going to hold each other accountable. We're going to leave, though, with 3 principles of the People's Movement Assembly. And that is, what are the problems? What are the solutions? And what are we collectively going to do about it? Right now, we have these things where we're all discussing in our own silos what we're going to do. And sometimes we do have conferences, and not to negate the positive and the importance of what happened in the assembly that we had in Atlanta and even in Oakland. But was it a debate? Was it to bring us to this place to say, these are the terms, and just like the woman right now in the Amazon, they are not allowing oil to be there. They are all collectively taking action to take out any oil rig in their country, in the Amazon, because they made it a people's movement that we decided as a people. And I think that's the thing, is that we don't have, if we look back at these dates, the numbers to say we're coming just to discuss. And so for me, that is what being a part of the Black Radical Congress, that's what I feel is missing to hold them accountable, is that we need to first find a platform that we all agree to disagree, but also feel safe enough that when we get there, we're not going to blow up and leave the space because we argued and couldn't hear each other. Instead, a process like a PMA would say, there's a way you're going to talk, there's a way you're going to be mad, and there's not going to be some infiltration in that place when we have this space. There's going to be respect, even if we don't agree, but we will come out with, until the end, something we all agree with. And I think that, to me, is what is necessary in getting to those results that you say should be had. Because at the end, we can say all petty bourgeois, neoliberalists, even politics got to go. And we all would walk out together on that plane. I don't see that we've all agreed to hear all that from each other, so that it's a process. I yield.
Thank you for that, Alida. And what you're describing, there was a lot of reaction in the chat, so I'll say, take a look at that. I see Brother Khalid is on stack, but before we go there, I want to give Psycho an opportunity to respond either to the second question or if he wants to contextualize his response in anything that we are sharing today. Please feel free to do so now.
Beautiful. It kind of all flows together, right? Like from internationalizing the struggle today, I feel like we kind of have to take a step back and go back to like the education. I mean, and that does go into the way Africans have been portrayed in the media. Because growing up, all my life, I heard that they were dirty people asking for handouts, and I feel like that narrative has been all too strong. I mean, as to holding leaders accountable and stuff, I feel like personally, they should be voted out. They should be voted out. That system is in place. They should be out of there. And reparations should also be given out aggressively. I feel like that doesn't happen because, as Valerie just said, like we don't have the numbers. We haven't gotten to a place where we can all like make our voices heard. You know what I mean? I've been in various different spaces, and I do feel like there are numbers there, just not gathered together. You know, we all essentially want the same things. It's just always the question of like, how do we go about it, and what are our underlying politics, and even what do we call ourselves? And I feel like that's also like the biggest thing about the BLM movement, Black Liberation, Black Lives Matter, whatever you want to call it. I feel like it's been entirely reactionary, but from the reactionary movements that have sprung from it, there's a lot of revolutionary spirit that needs education, that needs guidance, and they need comrades. And I feel like this all flows together. And I've always been very passionate watching it, like the conferences of the past, even though I've only seen like 2-3 of them and things like that. After those conferences, we then seen people from the different communities go into the communities and get into work as individual yet organized units, creating effective change. And I would love to be a part of that and make that happen. And yeah, that's all I have to say. I'm excited.
Thank you for everyone who's contributed so far. We love when people are like, offering their self and their their skills to the movement in these ways that help move us forward. And we see Brother Khalid as well as Jindu on staff. But before we go there, I want to raise, because there's a lot of discussions that's addressing some of the questions. So the third question, which is, what are the features of African socialism today, as Brother Malcolm mentioned in the film, or in the clip, excuse me, as well as how do we organize ourselves and unite movements across borders in order to build strength and tear down imperialism, as Brother Malcolm described. And I want to also connect this, as I mentioned, to what Brother Jalil mentioned earlier with regard to those the 3 groups of Pan-Africanists, people who identify as part of the Black Liberation Movement, and New Africans. So if you can contextualize it in that way, that will be great. So Brother Khalid and Jindu are on staff. Brother Khalid, please go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to respond to the comments in the narrative presented by Sister Alida, except possibly, an exception might be the 1968 Black Power Conference that she referenced in the chat. Everything else that she is referencing occurred during what I would generally call the post-civil rights era, right? And so there was a lot of competition, there was a lot of scrambling, there was a need for definition, And there was a need to try to position us as a collective national Black community within the universal struggle, the anti-imperialist and anti-colonial struggle. And it was that type of pushback that went on over and continues to go on over the last 40 years or so. I was at the Revolutionary People's Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1970 that was precipitated by Philadelphia's own version of Black August, which led to the arrest and the convictions and the continued incarceration and subsequent death of some of the Philly Five, as well as other formations. I also participated in the Black Radical Congress of 1998, which was a reaction to the success, believe it or not, of the Million Man March and the Million Man March movement of 1995 and 96 to 97. I also supported and became a member of NBID, the National Black Independent Political Party. I joined that organization while I was still incarcerated before I came home. So I'm familiar with some of the politics and some of the history and momentum and context behind a lot of these gatherings. They were great gatherings, but the bottom line is today we have to be clear about who we are and what we're fighting for, not necessarily all the issues. We keep coming together to talk about the issues. We need to talk about who we are and what we're fighting for. And I'll say this, if you look at what was going on in the Civil Rights era, basically during the Civil Rights era, the movement was about dismantling Jim Crow. However, Jim Crow took form and took shape, whether it was around issues of school segregation, whether it was around issues of jobs and economic opportunities, whether it was around issues like drinking out of water fountains or being able to go to a restaurant and use other public facilities. The struggle, the movement overall, North and South, East and West, was a movement that was pushing towards the dismantling of Jim Crow. The enemies were easy to identify, mostly white men and the white women and children who supported them in the institutions and systems which gave them power. Now it's a little bit more complex, a little bit more complicated. Many of us are not even clear about who our enemies are. We think our friends, we think many of our enemies are actually like our friends. We're so confused, right? So we need some clarity before we can talk about any principle or operational unity with international forces. And you talk about defending the international rights of Black folks or African folks. We can't even call account today in 2023 the criminal elements within our own neighborhoods and communities that do harm to our own people. We can't call the young dudes account who sell drugs. We can't call them to the rug for how they treat the women in terms of like the teenage prostitution that's rampant within our communities and neighborhoods, right? The racketeering stuff that's rampant within many of our communities and neighborhoods. The neighborhood drug cartels within our communities and neighborhoods. 50 years ago, we had some basic formations that had the courage and some type of tenacity to at least make some moves to address those type of issues, either through education or through force, or both at times. We don't even have that now, right? So we can't talk about how we're gonna hook up with people on an international level who are out here, not just marching and protesting, but bearing arms and defending their rights and fighting for their freedom, where we can't even protect our own communities and neighborhoods, internally or externally. We have to tell the truth. We got to deal with these realities. Last but not least, I think we oftentimes conflate tendencies with what I like to call, well, as a matter of fact, I made a note of it, so I don't really need to talk about it that much. If you look in the chat, and it's something that I wrote about in one of these books as well. We talk about this whole thing about who we are and what it is we want to represent, right? We have certain type of ideological tendencies, but we also have some political preferences as well. And they're not the same thing within the Black community, and we need to be clear. I made a note, contrast political tendencies versus ideological preferences. People can jump up and down all day and call themselves Pan-Africanists, Black nationalists, revolutionary nationalists, or even New Africans, right? But we got to look at what they actually do in real time, in real life. That's really what matters. So we have to be clear about that. We got to give more definition to what our movement is really, really about. Then we could talk about developing principle unity and hopefully operational unity with other people abroad.
All right, thank you for that, Brother Khalid. And I think I would further add that I don't know if these things are also like mutually exclusive, right? Like you can be a Pan-Africanist and then also be a New African or operate within the Black Liberation Movement. Though I do understand what Brother Jalil was pointing out. But Jindu is on stack. Please feel free to go ahead. Unmute yourself.
I'm still like processing a lot of what Brother Khalid just shared. I think I echo everything that he said, and I actually take myself off the stack. I think the only thing I would add, going on what Psycho had shared earlier and some of the comments that we had earlier about like, what do we do in terms of holding the people that hold themselves out as our leaders accountable? I think that's something that we also have to really get comfortable with, and it speaks directly to something that Brother Khalid shared about like, how are we seeing some of our enemies as friends? How are we seeing some hallmarks of success under empire as hallmarks of success for liberation? Like we look at the people who celebrate Kamala and who celebrate, what's her name, Katanji, and who celebrate, all of these individuals who have amassed power as, while playing their role as, emissaries of empire, right? While being politicians and being beholden to a power structure that has nothing to do with us, but while, speaking the language and making themselves accessible and making themselves palatable to us. I think that we have to be really clear about like not celebrating wins under empire and not taking power seriously that's garnered under empire. Like politicians are not our friends, they're not our allies, right? And how can we think about ways in which we have to kind of check the impulse to be like, oh, this is the first Black this or the first Black that, and think of that as a victory versus looking at them as people who are willingly choosing to legitimize empire.
Wow, thank you for that. And if you're after ideating on what Brother Khalid said, if you want to put yourself on the stack, please feel free to do so. There was a question that's being asked about like what does the Big Six, as Malcolm described, look like today? And also Jordan uplifted the National Black Radical Organizing Conference in June, where we unpacked the nonprofit industrial complex a bit and talked about how in this kind of neoliberal society, we see people who are receiving a lot of funding or recognition from empire, and many people uplift them as leaders, right? Again, I raised what Dr. Hare said about the leaders of Black versus the Black leaders, ones where the community puts them in power versus the power structure. So we must be careful about this. I thank you for that. And so we're going to move on to question number 4.
If I could just 1 minute just add really quick, kind of just tying in all of the questions, but I'll be really brief. I think Marcus Garvey had a plan, right? And Malcolm was acknowledging that in the last, well, not just in the last couple of months, but he does mention Marcus Garvey. We read one of his speeches in which he mentioned Marcus Garvey, and in what we just listened to today, he said that it's not an accident that African people aren't united, right? And when he mentions Marcus Garvey, a month later, he says that Marcus Garvey tried to unite us, right? Africans in the Caribbean and South America, North America, and he was jailed for attempting to do that. So I think like when it comes to the answer to the problem, somebody mentioned in the chat, they said internationalizing our issues is the answer, right? And that I know that that's simple, but I think we do have to like really take a concerted, be intentional in doing that, and create international institutions. Like we talked about Pan-Africanism and New African. I myself, like I'm a member of the African People's Socialist Party, and we consider ourselves African internationalists. And I don't want to put that in one of those categories. But we also have a path in the movement, right, to liberation. And one of the things that we have done is created chapters on the continent, right? There's the African People's Socialist Party in South occupied Tanzania, known as South Africa, and there's members of our organization in different places throughout the continent, as well as Europe and the Caribbean, as a part of the African Socialist International. So I think creating those international institutions, right, to address all of our problems as African people is important. And the last thing, I think, utilizing the institutions. Malcolm talked about the United Nations, right? And I think Malcolm today would be very critical of the United Nations. But we still, just like we, as an organizing tool, I think we can use the United Nations just like we use voting in America, or we should be using it as an organizing tool, not as a means to liberate African people. So that's all.
Thank you for that, and don't let that latter point go off above your head for folks listening. But question number 4, I'd be remiss if we didn't bring this up, because we don't want to push women to the back, right? But Brother Malcolm has always had a serious critique of the shortcomings of Black men in our community, and has also amplified the efforts of Black women revolutionaries who have done so much with such little support. We know, like raising names of Gloria Richardson, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, etc. One thing, and he says in the speech, one thing I have stressed is the importance of giving freedom to the woman, giving her education, giving her the incentive to get out and put that same spirit and understanding in the children. And I frankly am proud of the contributions our women have made in the struggle for freedom. So the question is, how can we bridge the gap and cultivate, uplift, and protect Black women leaders who are exemplars of leaders within liberation movements, struggle for freedom, as Malcolm says, whilst encouraging more brothers to get their politics and act together? So I see Psycho is on stack. If other folks also want to address this, please do so. And Jindu as well. So Psycho, you can come off mute, and then Jindu will have the final word.
Thank you. That was really something that stood out to me, because like when I started coming out in this movement, and even honestly ever since then, one of the most prolific things that I've experienced is like literally like the lack of Black men that are in this work, and the abundance of women that are like literally here on the front lines, but also being called like hyper aggressive, right? And that's always been kind of weird to me in the so-called revolutionary movement. I definitely do feel like it's also been strikingly, like growing up in the hood and stuff, growing up in New York, period. It's also been strikingly weird to me how like disrespected women are in general, but how also like men kind of just move to try and protect them and care for them, and also like truly listen to them. So what Malcolm said about like empowering them, because like men listen, like we do listen to them, that's something that needs to be like highlighted again. I feel like we need to hold ourselves more accountable in our communities to do that. Yeah. And also, like what Chindu said, LGBT people have also been like kind of dumped on in this movement as well. When we're supposed to be out here for everybody, they've taken very much revolutionary stances and kind of like opposed a bunch of the norms that too many people are afraid to speak on. That's all I got to say.
Thank you for that, Psycho. Very on the nose. Jindu will give you the final word.
Oh shoot, I don't want the final. I see Brother Khalid is on stack, so I'm gonna say this super briefly, but everything that Psycho said, I absolutely agree with. And I think we need to call our men to account, our cishet Black men, in terms of what it means when you are dumping on Black women, what it means when you're dumping on Black LGBTQIA people. That is nothing more than an appeal to patriarchy under empire. It's nothing more than looking for your space as someone who is comfortable and valued under empire, right? There's nothing more colonial than being queerphobic. There's nothing more colonial than being misogynistic, right? And I think that we have to use that as the basis for our interrogation of like why Black men are treating our Black femmes and our Black LGBTQIA people the way they do, because often so many people have more smoke, and Black women are implicated also in the treatment of Black LGBTQIA people. And I say this as a Black cishet woman, but we have to think about, why do people have more smoke for the marginalized amongst our Black community than they do for the actual empire. And I often wonder that, like, it's like people are, you know, going to the ends of the earth to dump on and to speak poorly of and to, in quotes, talk about the evils of feminism and queerness and all these things, and they're ignoring the empire that has its foot on all of our necks.
Right on, absolutely, and punch down, right? Absolutely. Brother Khalid, if you want to uplift this point, or have a point to raise, but if we want to introduce something new, we can reserve it to next time. So,
well, I'd like to say this. I think that once again, we need to recognize the historical context and the cultural, social context in which Malcolm made his comments regarding uplifting and recognizing Black women or African women and the roles they play within the national liberation struggles and anti-colonial movements. Look at the date of his talk. Look at the historical context in which he spoke. And his criticisms of Black men were not so Black men could be polite or kind or sensitive. His criticisms were so that Black men would fight and take up arms. This was a criticism that was made to contradict the social messaging and the political messaging of the traditional civil rights movement, that Black people, Black men and women and children should be nonviolent and should be relatively passive or non-aggressive when pushing back against Jim Crow, when pushing back against white supremacy. And what Malcolm was speaking to was basically saying that for Black men, you need to stand up, you need to take a stand, you need to take a position, you need to be aggressive, you need to fight back. You need to protect the women. Look at what the women are doing. Some are acting even more courageous than some of you, right? That's the context that this was spoken from. This wasn't spoken from a context of Black men being nice, being polite, saying kind words, and helping old ladies across the street. So I think we need to be clear about that, right? The other thing is, again, and I hope this displeases some people, because I want you to think about this. I think we are too caught up into neoliberal identity wars, right? That they have us fighting these wars over like identity, LGBTQ, Muslim, New African, Pan-Africanist. We could go on and on and on with the laundry list. We don't even have a damn cohesive movement to speak to yet or to speak about. We can hardly articulate what this movement, if we have one, really represents. We still struggle with that, but we spend an enormous amount of our energy and our resources and our intellect fighting these cultural wars that are very similar to the cultural wars that are being played out and fought every day through mass media between elements of the ruling class. Some call themselves Republicans, some call themselves Democrats, some call themselves conservatives, some call themselves liberals. All we're doing is being puppets, and they are the master puppeteers. We continue to fight these cultural wars internally as if it is the real war for freedom and liberation, and it is not. We have to continue to struggle in and out. We have to struggle against the forces of imperialism, of colonialism, of neocolonialism, even as internally we have to struggle against the forces that keep us all subjected, right? In terms of patriarchy, matriarchy at times, all of it, right? So there it is. I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna stop it. But we need to have these conversations, hardcore conversations. And I know you're going to give me some space about the conference this Saturday, but we need to have these real hardcore conversations about how we can move our collective narrative forward.
I think your point
and not
was,
continue to walk in circles and get stuck.
Thank you. So I think Brother Khalid's point was made. I want to respond to that in that, but I want to give Alita some space. I'm gonna take permission to just go a little bit over our time before, and we just circle back. And Brother Khalid, you can put the link to the conference in the chat. But Alita, if you want to have the final word on that before we officially wrap, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Tone. And thank you, everyone. All of it's been good, and it's important that we continue to have the discussions. I think for me, I want to go to the idea of the neoliberalist thought that we were just talking about, because I feel that there is a place where a lot of the groups I'm in don't even use the same terminology. And so I do know we have always tried to come up with a collective definition of what that looks like, because of so many different things happening. Again, why I believe in the People's Movement Assembly. But I want to go to the factor of what here in Land Corps for me, a personal, right? And to me, the impersonal is important, especially when we have young people so often not hearing our stories, but hearing our theory. And so for me personally, I want to say, as a mother who raises a son, and I had for his birthday, us to really, during Black August here, after his birthday, talk about the ISIS papers. And the whole factor for me in the hardships we've had, because I was terrorized as a revolutionary, you know, raising a child and going underground, thank goodness for groups like Rosenberg, even though they're not Black, to support us. My children are very aware who our allies are and also who our comrades are. But there are times when you look at two children, and again, I'm coming from a personal, my children are 23 and 21, and the steps that I had to take because I was arrested, because I was put through, and, you know, a lot of political prisoners need to talk about this as well. The Rosenberg comes through because of what, how do we continue, as what the ISIS paper says to me as a Black mother, to let my son know he is to fight and defend me, not to just become docile and go into neoliberalist nonprofits, right? But the truth of the matter, to keep my son's esteem, and we don't have the sisters telling the brothers, when in fact I do what it is I had to do, or any sister, I'm using me as an example though, including Asada. Our children need to have a space where not just nonprofit white folks who are intentionally good to keep us to understand, and my son to know, his name is Justice, that he still is a fighter and a warrior. He's always believed that because his mama put that in him. According to the ISIS papers, that is my duty. I am that one. But when in fact we don't come through to see the importance of this work, which is also a part of the blueprint. Not everyone's going to be right there on the front line when it comes to this war. Some of us are going to be getting folks ready. Some of us are going to be supporting those that may not be able to. And some of us are going to be getting, you know, other pieces of things to, I ain't going to say everything, you know, of what we need to do. So if in fact my son is to be on the front lines, and there are no men after Baba Afrique, Hannibal Afrique, right, who was training the youth to be in rites of passage. There is a place that we do need to hear more from the woman. For those of us that are, who understand the impact of my son, who is now 21, and the only support systems he has is not our movement, but a nonprofit with some Black men that's doing the best they can, right? Because they Black is good, but doesn't mean that what I've taught him from the ISIS paper of him being here to protect his mama and me and his sister and his community, he is not the same warrior, because we have forgotten that most of our people are out there without a space for that training ground called rites of passage, that Hannibal Africa, and a lot of us now are doing more rhetoric and theory and talking, but not enclosing a space to develop those minds like we had for Camp Umziko, where we were always ready to defend, but at peace until then. And so I think those are the conversations I think realistically we need to hear from our own stories, because I think I can talk the theory all day too, but I have to be able to know that I have to show an example to this young man and this young woman called my daughter and son. And I can't forget that these people and these children that they hang with are watching and needing that leadership and needing that trading ground again, called what I believe is American exceptionalism. Because if in the places I've been in Cuba and Acapulco Village in Jamaica and even in Africa, we at least said, yeah, we all ready to fight. But in the meantime, we got to get our troops together. And if we don't have that, and we can't be organized to get that, so these kids know they are loved and they are a part of this movement, then we are forgetting a piece of this puzzle called the work we got to do. And that's where I love and respect what Jaleel has said in the training he did when We Are Our Own Conquerors, is that, yes, we have to remember that, yeah, some of us may all have to consider coming back to the South. So that way we are at least in agreement that there are certain places that we all need to be. But again, this is a conversation on that whole piece of liberalism, not neoliberalism, and also the pieces that aren't being talked about when it comes to having that other debate for me, which is including what has happened with the woman in our movement and us as nurturers, and as well as those that our children are watching to become warriors. It's hand in hand. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you for that. And I just want to make sure that we are I'm sure everyone is clear, but we don't want to forget that these identities are part of Black people, right? These things are not in conflict. We can hold multiple realities at the same time. So if the discussion to me we should dive further as to how do we do this instead of the fact that this can be done. But we are at time. I took permission to go a little over. So thank you for those who allowed us to go a bit 10 minutes or so over. We will pick up the discussion as we typically do next week. Next week, Tuesday, where we will unpack for 2 sessions Malcolm X's Message to the Grassroots. There we will discuss some of the questions that we did not get to from other power hours, such as things like becoming militant and how do we build cadre. Also, in this kind of social media activism world that we live in, where these things are rampant, how do we navigate organizing in Black liberation movements? So thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you will continue to honor Black August, and then remember the freedom fighters. Write to a political prisoner, write on behalf of a political prisoner. Learn about them. Learn about people in your community. Unite and organize. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you on Tuesday.
Peace and blessings. Before we close out, I have the link to the Eventbrite. This Brother Khalid want to briefly speak to what's happening this weekend, and I'll share the link in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thank you, brother. I greatly appreciate it. So, so this weekend, the New African Independence Party is going to have its annual conference. I think we missed 1 year because of COVID. And this year the theme is unity, solidarity, and intersectionality within the Black liberation movement. And the questions are, what does it mean? Does it really exist? And what should it look like? And so we want to have an open floor discussion, no experts, no special panelists, just the people who show up. Everyone will be given an opportunity to share what they think about unity, solidarity, intersectionality, and to respond to these particular 3 questions. Again, I think we need to have some serious, hard conversations about identity politics, whether it's sexual preference, orientation, or political identity and labeling. And what does it mean within the context of our movement? And what kind of movement are we going to have? Are we going to continue to fight these battles that look very similarly to the battles being fought between the Republicans and the Democrats? Or are we going to start to move forward and fight for our freedom and liberation? And even that has to be more clearly defined, because I'm watching narratives and I'm listening to narratives now where some of obviously reactionary neo-colonial Black forces use terms like liberation and revolution on a regular basis, which lends itself to more and more confusion amongst the masses of people. But if we're not there in those spaces, then, we concede defeat. And that's one of my biggest arguments as to why it's so important for us, the radical revolutionary people, to be involved in electoral politics. We need to occupy all spaces. Don't leave anything vacant for our enemies and adversaries to take advantage of and to manipulate. So that's another discussion.
Thank you for that, Brother Khalid. And the link to this conference will be in the chat. For those interested, we encourage you to join and learn from the panelists and participate as much as you're able. Thank you for that, and we will wrap today. We'll see everyone next week, Tuesday. Please go and